All right, so hello, beautiful people. Actually, no, I know. Hello, beautiful people. Yeah, hi, YouTube. Today I want to go over Ayato's kit and just talk about, I mean, not really about how strong he's gonna be or anything like that. More like what you can expect out of a kit like his in terms of like what teams make sense with him and things like that. In terms of like actual strength, it's really hard to say before release because the numbers themselves can still change before release. Like there just might be things we haven't figured out about him yet. And so wait until he's been released for like a week or two to have a good idea of how strong he is. So let's start with the Ascension passives, because most of the time, the skill and the burst are going to reference something from the Ascension passives, or something about the Ascension passives is going to make the burst or the skill significantly stronger. I don't actually remember what his Ascension passives are. Let's talk about his most important passive. When Ayato cooks a dish perfectly, he has an 18% chance to receive an additional suspicious dish of the same type. And as you can see from this passive, Ayato is gonna be Hu Tao power creep because he's just Hu Tao, but better, obviously. Duh. Let's take a look at this kid. Normal shit, right? He does sword normal attacks, nothing crazy about this. Numbers aren't crazy either, so there's basically no chance of him becoming a physical carry. Ayato shifts positions and enters the shift. He will leave a one illusion and his original illusion with his loaded opponent's Bro, fuck this. He infuses his sword with Hydro and leaves a taunt behind. That's what it is. That's all it is. We don't need to read all this shit. But he can't do charge or plunge attacks. He can only do normal attacks, and his normal attack becomes a 3-hit combo that scales talent level 10 around 100 per hit, which is not terrible. What's really important about this is that it hits fast. That's what's important about it, is you can get, if I remember correctly, 15 hits, right? Yeah, he can get 15 hits total. And so you're basically always getting 300 times 5, right? 1500-ish motion value. Then there's the Namisen, which is basically, his sword slashes also have an HP scaling. And the way that it works is every time he attacks, he gains a stack up to 4. And for each stack, he deals more damage. So basically, the more he attacks, the more damage he deals. But as we'll see here, when he uses his E, he gains 2 stacks immediately. And when it explodes, he gains max. But point being, when he uses E, he gains 2 stacks. So he starts with 2. The first attack is going to have 2. The second attack is going to have 3. The fourth attack is going to have 4. And is going to stay at 4 for the next, like, 13. Well, 12. The 12 after that one. I think there's like 3 important considerations on this. So the first important consideration is that it lasts 6 seconds. You get 5 3-hit combos. So 15 hits in 6 seconds. So that's what? 2.5 hits per second? Which means he's probably going to be pretty decent at driving Beto, but not amazing. Hit lag, yeah, I don't know how hit lag affects it, unfortunately. Point being, you'll have to frame count it to actually know what the exact speed is. If it's 3 hits per second, that's really good. Because 3 hits per second, that means it's always gonna line up as to when the Beto cooldown like also lines up. And you're basically gonna get Beto, like perfect Beto procs. Not entirely sure about that one yet. That's one thing to keep in mind. The other thing to keep in mind is the way that internal cooldown works. The way that the internal cooldown works, it has a hit rule and a time rule. Technically, not all characters are like this. Technically, there's Fischl, that's an exception. But it also has the same thing, but it's not the same numbers. For most characters and for every character, like the general expectation is that they're going to follow normal internal cooldown rules, which are the 2.5 second rule and the 3 hit rule. So the way that this works is every 2.5 seconds, the timer resets, and you'll get an elemental application. But also, every 3 hits, you're gonna get another elemental application. And so the way this ends up working out is if you get your first hit at time equals 0, your second hit at times equal 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, etc. Right? You're gonna get a proc here of an elemental reaction or an elemental application. Then on the second hit, you're not gonna get anything. On the third hit, you're not gonna get anything. On the fourth hit, because it's been 3 whole seconds, timer resets. And it keeps going like this, over and over. Which is pretty neat, right? It's neat, it's clean. Yes, no, no, yes, no, no, yes. And if we kept going, it would keep going like this. But if the timers are slightly different, it can actually change the pattern. It's not going to be 1 every 3 hits. It can be something different. So let's say instead of being every 1 second, let's say every 0.6 seconds. On the first hit, you're obviously gonna react because internal cooldown doesn't start until you've actually applied an element, right? On the second hit, no, because it hasn't been 2.5 seconds. On the third hit, no. On the fourth hit, though, we have had 3 hits, and so the internal cooldown 3-hit rule kicks in, and you get another one. However, the time rule has not reset anything yet. We're still looking at the time of 0, not at the time of 1.8. So at 2.4, we're still gonna have a no, but at 3, it's been more than 2.5 seconds, and it resets again. And so our pattern, instead of being yes followed by 2 no's, is gonna be yes, no, no, yes, no. If instead of 0.6, it's 0.7. Again, our pattern is going to be different. So here, same reason as the previous 2. On the first 2, we don't get an elemental application. On the third one, the 3-hit rule kicks in, and we get a reaction. On the fifth one, sorry, did I say third? On the fourth one, you get a reaction. On the fifth one, it has been 2.5 seconds, and so our time rule kicks in, and it resets. And then the pattern is going to be yes, no, no, yes. That repeats itself. A really good way to see it in practice is with Kea. Before C6, his 3 icicles hit at a speed where you get this pattern, the yes, no, no, yes. But with C6, it hits faster, and so we get to the pattern we looked at before, and we get yes, no, no, yes, no instead. So depending on exactly how fast it takes, if it's slightly over 0.4, you're gonna get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 applications. If it is 0.4, we're gonna get 7? Yeah, 7 applications. So it's either 5 or 7 applications, most likely. So basically, we're getting about 1 hydro application per second. So that's relevant for when we get into the like what teams are gonna be good for him. Whether he's applying enough hydro to enable vaporizes on a unit like Xiangling. Energy regen, right? So thank you, by the way, to Ubacha for the information. We can probably include a link to his Twitter in the description. You guys should check him out if you want leaks. Guaranteed to generate 1 hydro energy particle, 1.9 second cooldown. On top of this, they have a 50% chance of generating a second hydro energy particle, 1.9 second cooldown. They probably wouldn't say 1.9 if he could only generate it 3 times. So the logical conclusion is that he can generate it 4 times, right? So he's gonna have 4 instances of energy generation, and each one of them is 50% gonna be 1 and 50% gonna be 2, so that averages out to 1.5. 4 times 1.5 is 6 particles. So he's gonna generate 6 particles over the period of his E. It's also possible that I'm not interpreting this correctly, in that he only gets 3 sets of particles, in which case it would be 4.5 average instead of 6. But I think it's 6. I've seen other people thinking it was 6 as well. So I think 6 is a fair assumption. That's actually kind of good. So before energy recharge, each particle generates 3 energy. So that's a total of 18 energy. So we can take a look at what his energy recharge costs would be in certain different teams. So in a vape team, you'd have Venet, you'd have Xiangling, you'd probably have an animal character. You're probably generating about 15 particles outside of Ayato. And he's probably not catching any of them. He might be catching a few. Let's say you're generating 15 particles. We're gonna separate them into different categories. Because when you catch a particle, when the character that's active on the field when you catch a particle gains more energy from that particle than the characters that are not active on the field. So we have to separate them. He's probably gonna catch all of his particles, so we can have this. And this is basically just an approximation of how much he'd get in a vape team. The amount of hydro particles he catches multiplied by 3, plus the amount of hydro particles he doesn't catch multiplied by 1.8. Here it's 0, but we're gonna do this in case we look at other teams with two hydro characters later. Plus the amount of non-hydro particles that he catches multiplied by 1, plus the amount of non-hydro particles that he doesn't catch multiplied by 0.6. Also, I just realized this should be 3, this should be 12. All right, so if he only uses his E 1 time, that would leave him needing around 280 energy recharge, which is a lot. Because of that, it's pretty safe to expect that since it's a 12-second cooldown, you'll generally be looking to use his E 2 times for every time you use your burst, 2 times per rotation. So instead of 6 particles, it's going to be 12, and then his energy generation, right? A lot more realistic. That being said, there is a problem with this, which is that it doesn't take into account his second ascension passive, or Ascension 4 passive that generates 2 energy for him whenever he's not on field and his energy is less than 40. The main problem that I have with this is that it's actually not that good. The reason why it's not that good is because let's take a look at situation number 1, right? Situation number 1 is you don't have that much ER and you're under 40 after your first E, right? So this is gonna be like after your first E. Let's say there's like, I don't know, 3 and then there's like 9 later, right? So you're generating around 20 energy during your burst. If that translates to under 40, so if you get less than 40, let's say you get like 35 and you get 3 procs of it, that means you're at 150 ER. But if you're at 150 ER, then your second E, like after the end of your second E, you'll only have generated another 36 energy, and plus the 41 that you had is not enough to use your burst again. And so it's very likely that one of 2 things is gonna happen. Either you use his burst first, then you swap out, and then you come back to him to use your E, which I can see fucking up with like certain rotations and making him feel a lot more clunky to play. Or you build enough ER that this doesn't actually do anything. I assume both situations are gonna be possible depending on like what the rotations with him are gonna end up being. I'm expecting that it's most of the time just gonna be that this passive isn't gonna be useful for you. So let's go back to this and let's just assume that potentially he's gonna need a little bit less ER, right? But it's probably gonna be around this range. So this range is basically what you'll get with energy recharge sands and a few substats going around. It's actually a little bit too little to justify running a weapon like Favonius, because Favonius will increase your particles generated, which is going to mean that your ER needs are going to be less, and then that's going to mean that your substat is getting slightly wasted. So I don't actually think Favonius is going to be that good on him, although I do think it's going to be pretty solid. So it's possible that Amenoma might be a pretty good option on him as well. So it's 12 energy per seed when it's at max refine, right? So 12 energy per seed, he's gonna get 2 seeds. So that's 24 energy, which would make his ER cost go down to 56, right? Makes the amount of ER he needs a lot less. This is pretty solid, right? The main problem with Amenoma is that you can't stack it up before your first burst, unless you just don't use your burst at the start, right? You're probably going to want to use burst and then E, but if you do that with Amenoma, you're not getting any seeds on your first burst, which means you're not generating any energy for your second burst, which can indeed be very clunky. So it is something to keep in mind. And by the way, this is on Project Amber. It's a pretty fucking clean database. I like it. We're also going to leave a link to that in the description. So we've talked about wanting to use our burst. We've talked about energy needs, but we haven't talked about what the burst actually does yet. So let's take a look at that. Unveils a garden of... It's basically Ganyu's burst, but Hydro. Ganyu's burst is a very solid ability. It does look like it works in a very similar manner. Obviously, haven't done any testing on it yet, so take that one with a grain of salt. But my expectation is that it's going to work basically the exact same way as Ganyu's burst, except with a different duration and cooldown, right? It lasts a little bit longer, the cooldown's a little bit longer. You also get a normal attack damage bonus for characters that stand inside of it. I don't think that's actually very significant, but we'll talk about that later. I don't think the cooldown actually matters. I think you're generally going to want to use your 2 Ayato E's every rotation, which means that effectively you're going to use your burst every 24 seconds rather than every 20 seconds. So even though your uptime looks like it's 90%, in reality I expect it to be more around 75%. Since we expect it to work a lot like Ganyu's burst, that means he's going to be very good when there's a lot of enemies grouped together, right? He's probably going to have a pretty decent inherent synergy with animal characters like Venti, Kazuha, and Sucrose. So what we're going to do now is we're actually going to make a sheet with all of these observations. So Ayato, so we're going to have weapons. So for the 4-star weapons, I think Fav is going to be meh. I think Sak is going to be no. Festering is going to be no. I think Amenoma is going to be pretty fucking good, especially at high refine. Very similar to Ayaka. Lion's Roar, maybe, is going to be a conditional. on what team you play him in. You don't want to use him in vaporized teams because vaporized teams generally want to have the enemy affected with Hydro so that you can vaporize your pyro damage. But you might want to use it on a taser team where the enemy is affected by both Hydro and Electro. Why not Festering? His E looks like it's gonna count as normal attack damage. It's possible I'm wrong, right? It's very possible that that's not the case, but my understanding so far is that it counts as normal attack damage. Black Sword is going to be very good as well. Harbinger of Dawn is also going to be very good. So I remember I did some calcs on it when like his first leaks came out, and because he has a little bit of HP scaling on top of his attack scaling on his E, it makes the value of attack percent a little bit worse than it usually is. Or rather, it's not that it makes attack percent worse, it's that it makes stat that scale both your HP and your attack damage. Those stats become better, right? Crit, it doesn't just scale the damage that comes from your attack, it scales the damage that comes from both your attack and your HP. But yeah, Harbinger of Dawn is going to be a pretty good option, but you have to, like, he's going to be an on-field unit, which makes it a lot harder to stay over 90% HP, right? But it's probably going to be his, depending on your Aminoma Refine, one of his two best free-to-play weapons, I would expect. There's also going to be Blackcliff, fine. What else is there on the 4 stars that's like relevant? Ali, Flute, don't use Flute ever. It's not going to be particularly terrible, it's just all the other weapons do something better. For the 5-star weapons, his signature weapon that's going to come with him, probably going to be a yes. Jade Cutter, yes. Royal doesn't exist, I don't know what you're talking about. Skyward Blade, it's actually going to be fine because he does look like he needs a lot of ER. It might even be good. We'll have to look at this. Mist Splitter, also going to be yes. Freedom Sworn, maybe, depends on the team, probably. Aquila, Summit, fine, probably. Like, it looks like most of the 5-star weapons are going to work on him. So overall, like, he has a lot of options for weapons, it looks like. Like, I'll make a weapon comparison when he comes out. So for those of you on YouTube, make sure to follow on twitch.tv/thejeff77, where I do this kind of shit live all the time. Now, for his artifacts, he's going to have a lot more freedom in artifacts than like most recent units that have been released. So 4-piece Heart of Depth is going to be solid. His signature set that's coming out that I don't remember the name of is going to be solid. Gladiators is going to be solid as well. And unlike these two sets, you probably have a lot of good Gladiators pieces. Don't go 4-piece Shimenawas because he does look like his burst is going to be relevant. What else is there? There's 2-piece mix and match of Glad, Heart of Depth, whatever, fine. 4 Emblem, fine. 4 Blizzard Strayer, situational, but great. 4 Thundering Fury, situational, jury's still out. There's a few things that make TF, like, quite good. So A, you're getting 1 whole ass more proc. Instead of 2 procs per rotation, you can get 3 procs per rotation, which is obviously a lot more. But it's not just that. The other significant thing is because you get 1 more E period, you get 6 more particles, which makes your ER requirements significantly lower. TF is useful in that it gives you more damage on Ayato and more energy generation, and is bad in the way that it forces your Ayato to stay on the field for longer. Whether or not that's going to be worth it, I'm not sure yet, and we'll have to look at when he comes out. That is going to leave him with a few potential teams. So his Hydro application on his burst is very likely to be similar to Ganyu's. It is possible that there are going to be situations where he applies enough Hydro to sustain Shangling Vaporize. I don't expect that to be something you can do consistently. So vape teams, they're gonna be good. They're gonna be good because Shangling's broken. They're probably not gonna be the best Shangling teams. He's probably not gonna be the best Hydro unit to play in a Shangling team, because it doesn't look like he can vaporize. Like, he doesn't have 1 big hit, so there's no like big hit for him to vaporize, and his Hydro application looks a little bit sporadic, which is gonna mean that he's probably not gonna be able to let Shangling vaporize the first like 4 or 5, maybe even 6 hits of her Pyronado. I think maybe forward vape Sunfire. No, because again, he doesn't have a big hit. Most of his hits aren't triggering reactions, right? What makes Child so good in Shangling teams is that yeah, he has a lot of small, fast hits, but he also has a nuke on his burst. And then you can vape the nuke on his burst and then use all of his small, fast hits to make Xiangling vape the rest. But it is probably going to be a team that you can do. If you want your Ayato to just have big numbers, then Sunfire forward vape might be a thing you want to look at. I don't think it's going to be very good. Okay, so I think vape teams are going to be good, but they won't be optimal. So that leaves him with, well, 3 other potential teams, right? So you can either use him like in mono Hydro teams, so with other Hydro units. I think that's not going to be that great either. I think Hydro's reactions are so fucking good that if you're not using them, you're trolling, you're griefing yourself. So it's going to be meh, probably. Taser is probably going to be either with the TF set, Thundering Fury set, or just Heart of Death, like normally. I think he's going to be a pretty good Taser driver. It is looking like his best teams are going to have no healer in Taser teams, which is like, it's definitely a turn off for a lot of people, but his teams with a healer should still be pretty good. What about Jean? Jean is just not that great in Taser teams. She doesn't trigger enough swirls to get a lot of damage, and she doesn't have a passive like Kazu has that increases damage either. It's fine, but it's just not like amazing. Then there's gonna be the Freeze team, which I also think is gonna be great. I think the main thing about Freeze team is he's gonna work a lot like Ganyu in Freeze teams, where he's a lot stronger when there's multiple enemies and you get more procs of your burst, and he's gonna look a lot weaker when that's not the case. The main advantage of running him in a Freeze team is A, freezing enemies together means they're not going away from each other, means you can have more of them be hit by more droplets, right? Because it seems like it works like Ganyu's burst, so that means that there's a bunch of droplets that are gonna spawn, but a lot of them are gonna spawn above specific enemies or on specific enemies, which means if the enemies are scattered, those droplets are only gonna hit that one enemy, but if they're all together, each droplet is gonna hit each enemy, and that's where the quadratic scaling term comes from, right? Freeze means you can keep them together more easily, which means it's gonna be easier to take advantage of that. On top of that, you get access to the Blizzard Stray artifact set, and 40% crit rate is just fucking broken. The damage increase you gain from 40% crit rate, let's take a look at like what happens normally. Let's say on a normal character, you'll probably have like 180 crit value from artifact. You're probably gonna have, let's say you have a crit ascension, 98.4, right? Or 60, it doesn't really matter. 60 from base stats, right? Blizzard Strayer adds 80% crit value because it adds 40% crit rate, which means that your crit multiplier is getting increased by 32%. You're effectively gaining over 30% DPS from that 4-piece. In case you didn't know, that's a lot of damage. It's basically always just gonna be better than the damage you gain from Heart of Death, right? Because Heart of Death is 45% damage percent on his skill and 15 on his burst, but he gets, like, you don't start at 100%, you start at 146. So what you're actually gaining is on his skill 30% and on his burst 10%. So Blizzard Fury offers you more on your E and a lot more on your burst. And assuming you play him in a freeze team where a lot of your damage is coming from your burst because droplets are scaling quadratically, getting that increased damage on burst is very, very relevant. And again, right, not entirely sure if they do scale quadratically, but they probably do. Wait until people actually know whether or not that's the case before you wish on the character. These are like the main teams, but realistically, you're also gonna have some like soup teams, which is basically just throw an animal unit, get some overload, some electrocharge, some swirl, all that shit in there. You'd probably do that with Fischl Bennett Kazuha or Fischl Bennett Venti. That's probably going to be pretty decent. He might be a viable replacement for Kokomi in the Sugro Sketchum or Sukokomon team, but obviously he's not a healer, so he's going to make the team even harder to play. I do think in soup teams he's going to be pretty great as well. Soup teams are just really good in general because Overload and Electrocharge are just such good reactions. Obviously, units that have quadratic scalings like this are always going to be really nice with Venti against the kind of content where Venti excels. Field time requirements are pretty high for him to like actually get the kind of shit he wants. Right? For him to get the energy recharge he needs, the energy generation he needs to stay on the field for like 12 seconds per rotation, right? Which is, it is a lot. So I don't know if it's worth putting him in a Ganyu team with Venti Diona or Venti Rosaria. We'll have to see. I'm excited for Ayato. I think his teams are going to be really interesting. I think he's going to be pretty fun to play. I expect him to be very in line with recent releases. In terms of like balance, I think they've been very balanced recently, and that I'm expecting the same from Ayato.